Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. On September 11, 2001, the world witnessed one of the most devastating attacks in modern history. The destruction of the World Trade Center, the tragic loss of nearly 3,000 lives, and the far-reaching consequences still shape our world today. But while the official story has been established, over the years, a number of conspiracy theories have emerged, claiming that the attacks were not what they seemed. From controlled demolitions to theories suggesting the U.S. government had prior knowledge, or even involvement, there's no shortage of alternative explanations. In this video, we'll dive deep into these theories, explore their origins, and look at the evidence that both supports and debunks them. Whether you believe in the official account or question the narrative, we're going to unpack it all. So let's get into it, and take a closer look at the mysterious events of 9/11 and the theories that continue to spark debate nearly 24 years later. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications as we explore one of the most talked about events in history and the questions that still remain. The attacks of September 11, 2001. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the United States experienced the deadliest terrorist attack in its history when 19 hijackers, affiliated with the extremist group al-Qaeda, carried out a coordinated assault using 4 commercial airliners. These attacks targeted major American landmarks and resulted in nearly 3,000 deaths. At 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time, American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. The impact caused a massive explosion, sending smoke and debris into the air. Initially, many believed this to be a tragic accident, but that assumption changed just 17 minutes later. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower in a similar attack, confirming that the nation was under deliberate assault. The collisions ignited massive fires, weakening the structures. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed after burning for 56 minutes, and at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower followed, bringing an end to the iconic skyline of Lower Manhattan. The destruction left thousands dead and covered New York City in a cloud of toxic dust and debris. Meanwhile, at 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the western side of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The explosion and resulting fire caused significant damage to the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense, killing 125 people inside the building along with all 64 passengers and crew members on board. The fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was also hijacked and believed to be headed toward Washington, D.C., with the White House or the U.S. Capitol as its potential target. However, passengers aboard the flight, having learned of the other attacks via phone calls with loved ones, attempted to retake control of the aircraft. In the struggle, the plane crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at 10:03 a.m., killing everyone on board but preventing a likely strike on another major government landmark. In just under 2 hours, these 4 coordinated attacks shocked the world, leading to immediate confusion, panic, and emergency responses across the United States. Air traffic controllers grounded all flights nationwide for the first time in history, while first responders in New York and Washington worked frantically to rescue survivors. In the hours and days that followed, the U.S. government confirmed that the attackers were linked to al-Qaeda, a terrorist organization led by Osama bin Laden. The event would set off a global chain reaction, including military conflicts, new security policies, and a lasting impact on American society and international relations. Casualties and damage of the 9/11 attacks. The September 11, 2001, attacks resulted in nearly 3,000 deaths, making it the deadliest terrorist attack in world history. The vast majority of casualties occurred at the World Trade Center in New York City, where the Twin Towers collapsed after being struck by 2 hijacked planes. The death toll included not only those on the planes and inside the buildings but also hundreds of emergency responders who rushed in to help. Casualties. In total, 2,977 people were killed during the attacks, including 2,753 in New York City at the World Trade Center, 184 at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, 40 on United Flight 93, which crashed in Pennsylvania, 246 passengers and crew members on the 4 hijacked planes. Among the victims were individuals from more than 90 different countries, making it an international tragedy. The attacks also claimed the lives of 343 firefighters, 60 police officers, and 8 paramedics, the largest single-day loss of emergency responders in U.S. history. Many of these brave individuals died while trying to evacuate people from the Twin Towers before their collapse. In addition to the immediate deaths, thousands of people later suffered from health complications due to exposure to toxic dust, smoke, and debris. First responders, residents, and office workers in Lower Manhattan developed chronic respiratory diseases, cancers, and other illnesses linked to the hazardous conditions at Ground Zero. Over the years, many have died from these health effects, bringing the broader death toll from 9/11 even higher. The physical destruction caused by the attacks was immense. The Twin Towers, which had been an iconic part of the New York skyline since the early 1970s, were completely destroyed, along with surrounding buildings in the World Trade Center complex. The collapse generated a massive cloud of dust and debris, covering Lower Manhattan in a thick layer of toxic particles. At the Pentagon, the crash of Flight 77 caused a section of the western side of the building to collapse, resulting in extensive damage to one of the most secure and important military headquarters in the world. Reconstruction efforts began quickly, and the damaged section was rebuilt within a year. The economic impact of the attacks was also staggering. The direct financial losses from the destruction of property, business interruptions, and rescue operations were estimated to be over $10 billion. However, the long-term economic effects, including lost productivity, increased security costs, and the financial downturn that followed, pushed the total economic impact to over $100 billion. The stock markets, which were closed for several days following the attacks, suffered major losses upon reopening. Insurance claims related to the destruction were among the largest ever filed, and the aviation industry, tourism sector, and businesses in New York City suffered significant downturns. In the years after September 11, extensive efforts were made to rebuild and commemorate the lost lives. The site of the Twin Towers, known as Ground Zero, became the focus of reconstruction and memorialization. The 9/11 Memorial and Museum, which opened in 2011, honors the victims with twin reflecting pools set in the footprints of the original towers, inscribed with the names of all who died. The One World Trade Center, also known as the Freedom Tower, was constructed near the original site and officially opened in 2014 as a symbol of resilience. Standing at 1,776 feet, it is the tallest building in the United States and a testament to the city's ability to rebuild after tragedy. Although more than 2 decades have passed since the attacks, their impact is still deeply felt. The event reshaped New York City, the United States, and the world, influencing policies, security measures, and public consciousness for generations to come. Al-Qaeda's role in the 9/11 attacks. The September 11, 2001, attacks were planned and carried out by al-Qaeda, a radical Islamist terrorist organization founded by Osama bin Laden. The group, which had previously conducted attacks against U.S. targets, viewed the United States as its primary enemy and justified its violence as a response to what it saw as Western oppression of Muslim lands. The 9/11 attacks were years in the making and were executed with meticulous planning, secrecy, and precision. Who was al-Qaeda? Al-Qaeda, Arabic for the base, was founded in the late 1980s during the Soviet-Afghan War. Initially, it served as a network for recruiting and funding mujahideen fighters resisting the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. However, after the war, it evolved into a global jihadist organization focused on attacking Western nations, particularly the United States. Osama bin Laden, a wealthy Saudi Arabian with extremist beliefs, became the leader of al-Qaeda and issued a series of fatwas, religious decrees, in the 1990s, calling for attacks against Americans. He accused the U.S. of stationing troops in Saudi Arabia, home to Islam's holiest sites, which he considered a desecration. Supporting Israel in its conflicts with Palestinians. imposing economic sanctions on Iraq, which he blamed for the suffering of Muslims. Under bin Laden's leadership, al-Qaeda launched several attacks against U.S. targets before September 11, including the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which killed 6 people. The 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, killing 224 people. The 2000 USS Cole bombing in Yemen, killing 17 U.S. sailors. These attacks demonstrated al-Qaeda's growing ability to strike Western targets, but the 9/11 attacks were on a completely different scale, designed to inflict maximum casualties and create global shock. The plot for 9/11 was developed in the late 1990s under the guidance of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, KSM, a senior al-Qaeda member who proposed the idea of using hijacked planes as weapons. Osama bin Laden approved the plan and provided funding, while Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian extremist, was chosen as the leader of the hijacking team. The 19 hijackers were selected from countries including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Lebanon. Many of them were young men radicalized by extremist ideology, and some had prior experience with al-Qaeda operations. They traveled to the U.S. and enrolled in flight schools, learning how to pilot commercial airliners. Over time, they carefully coordinated their movements, avoided suspicion, and waited for the right moment to execute their attack. The World Trade Center represented American economic power, while the Pentagon symbolized U.S. military strength. A fourth target, believed to be the White House or the U.S. Capitol, would have struck at the heart of American political leadership. The attacks were not just meant to kill people, they were designed to send a global message that the U.S. was vulnerable and that al-Qaeda could strike its most significant landmarks. Following the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. quickly identified al-Qaeda as the perpetrator. Intelligence agencies had previously tracked bin Laden's activities, and intercepted communications confirmed that the group was responsible. On September 20, 2001, President George W. Bush delivered a speech demanding that the Taliban regime in Afghanistan hand over bin Laden and dismantle al-Qaeda's training camps. When the Taliban refused, the U.S. launched the war in Afghanistan, targeting al-Qaeda's strongholds and ultimately forcing bin Laden and other leaders into hiding. Osama bin Laden remained a fugitive for nearly 10 years until May 2, 2011, when he was killed by U.S. Navy SEALs in Pakistan during Operation Neptune Spear. His death marked a significant victory in the fight against terrorism, but al-Qaeda remained active, later evolving into new groups such as ISIS. Although the core leadership of al-Qaeda was weakened after September 11, the ideology that fueled the attacks continued to inspire other extremist groups. The event led to major global counterterrorism efforts, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and new security measures such as the Patriot Act and increased airport screenings. Even today, the 9/11 attacks remain a turning point in modern history, shaping foreign policies, military interventions, and public perceptions of global terrorism. The War on Terror, launched in response to the attacks, led to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, costing trillions of dollars and affecting millions of lives worldwide. Immediate U.S. response to the 9/11 attacks. The September 11, 2001, attacks triggered an immediate and unprecedented response from the United States government, military, and emergency services. As the most devastating terrorist attack in U.S. history unfolded, officials scrambled to assess the situation, secure the nation, and prepare for potential further attacks. The initial hours and days after September 11 saw rapid decisions that would shape U.S. policy for decades to come. As soon as American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m., emergency services in New York City were deployed to the scene. First responders, including firefighters, police officers, and paramedics, rushed to evacuate people from the Twin Towers. Many individuals trapped on the upper floors were unable to escape due to blocked stairwells and intense fires caused by the jet fuel explosion. When the South Tower was struck at 9:03 a.m., it became clear that the U.S. was under attack. At 9:42 a.m., the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, took an unprecedented action, ordering all civilian flights grounded nationwide, the first time in history that the entire U.S. airspace had been shut down. Over 4,000 flights were forced to land at the nearest available airport, preventing further hijackings. At 9:45 a.m., the White House and U.S. Capitol were evacuated, as intelligence officials feared additional attacks on Washington, D.C. Moments later, at 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed, followed by the North Tower at 10:28 a.m. These collapses killed thousands, including 343 firefighters and 60 police officers, making it the deadliest day in history for U.S. emergency responders. At the time of the attacks, President George W. Bush was visiting an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida. At 9:05 a.m., while sitting in a classroom, his chief of staff, Andrew Card, whispered in his ear, "A second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack." Within minutes, Bush was moved to a secure location and began consulting with his national security team. At 9:30 a.m., he addressed the nation, calling the events a national tragedy, and vowing to find those responsible. By 10 a.m., he had authorized military action, and fighter jets were scrambled to patrol U.S. airspace. At 1:04 p.m., Bush was taken aboard Air Force One, which flew to a secure military base in Nebraska. The Secret Service feared that the White House or Air Force One itself could be a target. From there, Bush held a televised address, stating, "Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts." By the evening, Bush returned to Washington, D.C., and at 8:30 p.m., he addressed the nation from the Oval Office, declaring, "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." This speech signaled the beginning of the War on Terror, which would define U.S. foreign policy for the next 2 decades. Almost immediately, the U.S. military went on high alert. The Pentagon, which had been struck by Flight 77, activated its crisis response teams, and military bases worldwide increased their security levels. By the evening of 9/11, intelligence agencies had identified the terrorist group al-Qaeda as the likely culprit. The CIA, NSA, and FBI launched a global investigation, analyzing intercepted communications and financial transactions that linked the attackers to Osama bin Laden's network. Within 24 hours, reports emerged that the hijackers had trained in U.S. flight schools, and some had been on the FBI's watch list. However, gaps in intelligence sharing had allowed them to evade detection. On September 12, 2001, Bush convened a National Security Council meeting at the White House, where plans for military retaliation began. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and Vice President Dick Cheney advocated for immediate strikes against al-Qaeda's strongholds in Afghanistan. At the same time, the U.S. sought international support. On September 12, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1368, condemning the attacks and recognizing America's right to self-defense. Meanwhile, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time in its history, declaring that an attack on one member was an attack on all. This paved the way for U.S.-led military action with broad global backing. On September 14, 2001, Bush visited Ground Zero in New York City. Standing on the rubble of the fallen towers, he grabbed a firefighter's bullhorn and declared, "I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon." This moment became one of the most famous images of post-9/11 America, symbolizing unity and resilience. On September 20, 2001, Bush addressed Congress in a speech watched by 80 million Americans, announcing the official war on terror. He gave the Taliban regime in Afghanistan an ultimatum: hand over Osama bin Laden and dismantle al-Qaeda, or face military action. The Taliban refused, setting the stage for the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan on October 7, 2001. In the weeks following 9/11, the U.S. government made sweeping changes to national security policies. Key actions included the Patriot Act, October 26, 2001. This expanded government surveillance powers, allowing authorities to monitor phone calls, emails, and financial transactions in the fight against terrorism. Creation of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, 2002, a new federal agency was established to coordinate domestic security efforts, including airport security, border protection, and disaster response. Airport security overhaul. The Transportation Security Administration, TSA, was created, implementing strict screening procedures, reinforced cockpit doors, and a no-fly list to prevent future hijackings. Guantanamo Bay Prison, 2002, the U.S. set up a military prison in Cuba to hold suspected terrorists, leading to controversies over detainee rights, torture, and indefinite detention. The immediate response to 9/11 set the stage for 2 decades of U.S. military interventions, counterterrorism operations, and geopolitical shifts. While the war on terror initially focused on Afghanistan, it later expanded to include the Iraq War, 2003, drone strikes in multiple countries, and global intelligence operations. Domestically, American life was permanently altered, security became stricter, surveillance became more widespread, and national identity was reshaped by patriotism, fear, and political debates over civil liberties. Even today, the effects of 9/11 continue to influence U.S. foreign policy, military strategy, and national security measures. The initial response, driven by fear and a need for justice, led to some of the most consequential decisions of the 21st century. Global reactions to 9/11. The September 11, 2001, attacks were not just an assault on the United States, they sent shockwaves across the world. Governments, organizations, and ordinary citizens reacted with a mix of shock, grief, solidarity, and political action. The attacks marked a turning point in global geopolitics, leading to military alliances, policy changes, and shifts in international relations that are still felt today. As news of the attacks spread, world leaders and citizens across the globe expressed condolences and support for the United States. Many major cities held moments of silence, flew their flags at half-mast, or lit candles in honor of the victims. United Kingdom, then Prime Minister Tony Blair called the attacks an act of evil, pledging full support for the U.S. France, President Jacques Chirac said, "Today, we are all Americans," emphasizing France's solidarity with its longtime ally. Germany, Chancellor Gerhard Schröder declared unlimited solidarity with the U.S., a rare and strong statement. Russia, President Vladimir Putin called President Bush immediately, condemning the attacks and offering intelligence cooperation. China, the Chinese government condemned the attacks and called for international cooperation against terrorism, though its response was more measured. Iran, in an unexpected move, Iran's moderate government and citizens held candlelight vigils in Tehran, and then President Mohammad Khatami expressed sympathy, calling the attacks a humanitarian tragedy. However, Iran's leadership later criticized U.S. actions in the Middle East. Around the world, ordinary citizens gathered at American embassies, laying flowers, lighting candles, and holding vigils. In London, the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace played the American national anthem in solidarity, an extremely rare occurrence. In Canada, thousands of Americans stranded by the airspace shutdown were taken in by local families, an event later called Operation Yellow Ribbon. One of the most significant international responses came from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. On September 12, 2001, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time and only in its history. Article 5 states that an attack on one member is an attack on all, committing every NATO country to defend the U.S. This unprecedented move meant that NATO countries would support America's military response. As a result, NATO forces participated in Operation Enduring Freedom, the U.S.-led invasion of Afghanistan aimed at dismantling al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban government that had sheltered Osama bin Laden. The United Nations, UN, Security Council also reacted swiftly. On September 12, 2001, it passed Resolution 1368, condemning the attacks and recognizing the U.S.'s right to self-defense. The UN encouraged international cooperation against terrorism, leading to expanded efforts to combat terrorist financing, intelligence sharing, and border security. Following 9/11, many countries tightened their counterterrorism policies, expanded surveillance programs, and strengthened security at borders, airports, and major public spaces. Some key developments included: United Kingdom passed sweeping anti-terrorism laws and increased security at airports and public transit systems. European Union (EU) strengthened anti-money laundering laws and increased intelligence sharing among member states. Russia used the attack as justification to intensify its own counterterrorism operations in Chechnya. China expanded its domestic counterterrorism policies, though critics argue it also used the attacks to justify crackdowns on political dissenters. Many countries expanded their cooperation with the U.S. in counterterrorism efforts, sharing intelligence and participating in military operations in Afghanistan and later Iraq. 9/11 directly led to the U.S.-led War on Terror, which reshaped global military alliances. The Afghanistan invasion, 2001, saw NATO troops from Canada, the UK, Germany, and other allies deployed to assist in toppling the Taliban. Later, the 2003 invasion of Iraq was framed as part of the War on Terror, although it was more controversial, with some allies, such as France and Germany, opposing it. While many Muslim-majority nations condemned the attacks, reactions within these countries were mixed. Governments such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Pakistan publicly denounced al-Qaeda, fearing repercussions, but also faced internal divisions, as segments of their populations viewed the U.S. as an aggressor. In Palestinian territories, some media outlets broadcast images of a small group of people celebrating the attacks, though many Palestinians also expressed sympathy and condemned terrorism. In Iraq, then-President Saddam Hussein, who was not involved in 9/11, mocked the U.S. but did not officially support the attacks. In Afghanistan, the Taliban initially denied involvement but refused to hand over bin Laden, prompting the U.S. invasion. The global economy also felt the shockwaves of 9/11. Stock markets plunged, and investors panicked. Wall Street remained closed for nearly a week, and when it reopened, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped over 600 points, its largest single-day decline at the time. Oil prices surged due to fears of Middle Eastern instability. Airlines and travel industries suffered heavy losses, with many airlines facing bankruptcy over the following years. Governments imposed stricter financial regulations to prevent the funding of terrorist groups, affecting global banking systems. The 9/11 attacks reshaped global politics, security, and diplomacy for decades. The immediate solidarity gradually gave way to debates over U.S. foreign policy, military interventions, and counterterrorism tactics. Key long-term effects included: increased surveillance. Many governments passed laws similar to the U.S. Patriot Act, expanding intelligence agencies' powers. Rise of anti-American sentiment. As the U.S. launched wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, public opinion in some countries shifted against American military actions, particularly in the Middle East. Growth of counterterrorism alliances. Nations formed stronger intelligence-sharing networks to prevent future attacks. Expanded airport security. The TSA and similar agencies worldwide introduced stricter screening procedures, which remain in place today. The global reaction to 9/11 was initially one of unity and sympathy, but in the years that followed, divisions emerged over how best to combat terrorism. The attack fundamentally changed international relations, leading to new wars, shifting alliances, and an ongoing debate about security versus civil liberties. Even more than 2 decades later, the world still feels the impact of 9/11, whether in airport security, counterterrorism policies, or global conflicts that originated from the War on Terror. The September 11, 2001, attacks directly led to the U.S.-led invasion of Afghanistan, marking the start of the War on Terror. The primary objective was to dismantle al-Qaeda, capture or kill Osama bin Laden, and overthrow the Taliban government, which had provided a safe haven for terrorists. The operation, officially named Operation Enduring Freedom, OEF, was launched on October 7, 2001, with support from NATO and allied nations. This war became the longest U.S. military engagement in history, spanning 2 decades, and its impact continues to shape geopolitics today. After 2 decades of war, the U.S. decided to fully withdraw. In February 2020, President Donald Trump signed a peace agreement with the Taliban, setting a timeline for U.S. forces to leave by May 2021. When President Joe Biden took office, he extended the deadline to August 31, 2021. However, the withdrawal led to chaos. The Taliban rapidly advanced, capturing Kabul on August 15, 2021. The Afghan government collapsed, and President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. The U.S. and allies evacuated over 120,000 people, including Afghans who had worked with coalition forces. The Taliban re-established control, reversing many social and political gains made during the war. The withdrawal was widely criticized, with many calling it rushed and poorly planned. Images of desperate Afghans clinging to airplanes symbolized the failure of U.S. efforts to stabilize Afghanistan. Impact and consequences of the war. The war in Afghanistan was the longest war in U.S. history, with profound consequences. Human cost. Over 2,400 U.S. troops killed. More than 47,000 Afghan civilians killed. Over 66,000 Afghan security forces killed. Tens of thousands of Taliban and insurgents killed. Financial cost. The U.S. spent over $2 trillion on the war. Billions were spent on training Afghan forces, but the military collapsed in days after U.S. withdrawal. Political and social impact. Afghanistan remains unstable, with the Taliban ruling under strict Islamic law. Terrorist threats persist, as groups like ISIS-K continue attacks. The war weakened U.S. credibility, with allies questioning future military commitments. The U.S. invasion of Afghanistan was seen as a justified response to 9/11, but it evolved into a costly, prolonged conflict. While it succeeded in removing al-Qaeda's safe haven, it failed to create lasting stability in Afghanistan. Today, the war serves as a lesson on the limits of military intervention, and its legacy continues to shape U.S. foreign policy. Would you like to explore specific battles, U.S. strategy changes, or the Taliban's return to power in more detail? The September 11, 2001 attacks left a permanent mark on global history, shaping not only politics and security but also culture, art, and collective memory. In the years since, societies around the world have built memorials, museums, and tributes to honor the victims, while films, books, and songs have captured the emotions and consequences of that tragic day. From the 9/11 memorial in New York City to the way the attacks changed movies, music, and storytelling, the cultural impact of 9/11 remains deeply woven into modern society. The most significant tribute to 9/11 victims is the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, built on the site of the former World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. The memorial, completed in 2011, consists of 2 massive waterfalls sitting where the Twin Towers once stood, symbolizing loss and absence. Around the pools, the names of all 2,977 victims, from the towers, Pentagon, and Flight 93, are engraved, serving as a lasting tribute to their memory. Each year, on September 11th, a ceremony is held where the names are read aloud in remembrance. Beneath the memorial, the 9/11 Museum, which opened in 2014, houses artifacts from Ground Zero, including pieces of the towers, damaged emergency vehicles, and personal belongings recovered from the site. It also presents survivor accounts, last phone calls from victims, and photographs detailing the attacks and their aftermath, creating a space for reflection, education, and remembrance. Beyond New York, several memorials across the United States honor the victims of 9/11. In Arlington, Virginia, the Pentagon Memorial commemorates the 184 lives lost in the attack on the Pentagon, with illuminated benches arranged according to the victims' ages. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the Flight 93 National Memorial stands as a tribute to the 40 passengers and crew who fought back against the hijackers, preventing the plane from reaching its intended target. Other memorials, such as the Sphere, a sculpture that survived the collapse of the Twin Towers, serve as symbols of resilience. Across the world, cities and communities have also created their own local tributes, ensuring that the memory of the victims lives on. The cultural impact of 9/11 extends far beyond physical memorials. The attacks dramatically changed Hollywood and storytelling, influencing movies, TV shows, and documentaries. Films like United 93, 2006, and World Trade Center, 2006, depicted the events of the day, while Zero Dark 30, 2012, chronicled the decade-long hunt for Osama bin Laden. Many movies released in the years following 9/11 had to alter their content, some delayed their premieres, while others removed images of the Twin Towers from New York's skyline. Hollywood also shifted its focus to themes of national security and terrorism, with franchises like James Bond, Mission Impossible, and The Dark Knight incorporating post-9/11 anxieties into their narratives. Music and visual art were also deeply influenced by the attacks. Artists responded with songs that captured the emotions of grief, patriotism, and resilience, such as Where Were You, When the World Stopped Turning, by Alan Jackson and The Rising, by Bruce Springsteen. New York's spirit and strength were later celebrated in songs like Empire State of Mind, by Jay-Z and Alicia Keys. Meanwhile, visual art and photography became powerful tools for documenting the tragedy. Many paintings, sculptures, and murals depicted the Twin Towers, while photographs of firefighters, dust-covered survivors, and the ruins of Ground Zero became iconic images that captured the devastation and heroism of that day. The tribute in light, two vertical beams shining into the night sky where the towers once stood, has since become an annual symbol of remembrance. Literature also played a significant role in documenting and interpreting 9/11. Non-fiction works like The Looming Tower, by Lawrence Wright and Fall and Rise, The Story of 9/11, by Mitchell Zukoff examined the events leading up to the attacks and their aftermath. Fictional stories, such as Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, by Jonathan Safran Foer, explored the emotional toll on survivors and their families. The attacks reshaped political and historical writing, with thousands of books analyzing September 11th's impact on geopolitics, terrorism, and American identity. Beyond art and storytelling, 9/11 deeply impacted American culture and mindset. It led to a rise in patriotism, with flags, bumper stickers, and slogans like Never Forget becoming national symbols. However, it also fueled fear and anxiety, influencing policies such as the Patriot Act and the expansion of the Transportation Security Administration, TSA. Unfortunately, Islamophobia and discrimination against Muslim and Middle Eastern communities surged in the aftermath, highlighting the complex societal changes that followed the attacks. The rise of conspiracy theories questioning the official 9/11 narrative also became a lasting aspect of its cultural impact, with online communities debating alternative explanations for the tragedy. The impact of 9/11 was not limited to the U.S., it shaped global culture, politics, and art. Countries around the world saw an increased focus on terrorism in film and literature, while cities like London, Paris, and Berlin held solidarity vigils and built memorials in support of the U.S. Travel and public security were forever changed, as airports worldwide implemented stricter screening procedures and counter-terrorism efforts intensified globally. Today, 9/11 remains one of the most remembered and documented events in modern history. Every year, memorial ceremonies honor the victims, and the stories of first responders and survivors are preserved in books, films, and museums. The tragedy led to permanent changes in security, politics, and public consciousness, shaping how societies view global threats and resilience. From the 9/11 memorial in New York to films like United 93, the world continues to reflect on the loss, heroism, and consequences of that fateful day. The cultural impact of 9/11 extends far beyond memorials, it is embedded in the way we tell stories, remember the past, and navigate an ever-changing world. The controlled demolition theory. One of the most prominent and controversial conspiracy theories that arose after the September 11 attacks is the controlled demolition theory, which suggests that the World Trade Center towers, and possibly Building 7, were brought down deliberately through a carefully orchestrated demolition rather than collapsing as a result of the impact and subsequent fires caused by the hijacked airplanes. Proponents of this theory argue that the buildings fell at free-fall speed or in a manner that seemed consistent with a controlled demolition, raising doubts about the official narrative of the attacks. The theory gained traction due to several perceived inconsistencies in the official explanation. The key claims from those who support the controlled demolition theory include the following. 1. The speed of collapse. One of the main arguments is that the buildings fell too quickly, particularly in comparison to how they might have collapsed due to the structural damage caused by the plane crashes and fires. Supporters argue that the World Trade Center towers collapsed in almost free fall, which, according to them, would only be possible if the structural supports were deliberately weakened or destroyed by explosives placed within the buildings. They point to the fact that the buildings collapsed almost symmetrically, suggesting a pre-planned demolition. 2. The symmetry of the collapse. Proponents of the theory also point to the uniform collapse of the buildings. They argue that in a normal collapse due to fire and impact, a building would not fall in such a symmetrical and controlled manner. Instead, they claim, it would have likely collapsed in an irregular way, possibly leaning to one side or falling unevenly. The fact that the towers collapse straight down, at nearly free-fall speed, is often cited as evidence that they were brought down with explosives. 3. Molten metal and thermite. Some supporters of the theory have pointed to reports of molten metal found in the wreckage of the Twin Towers, particularly in the debris from the floors near the base of the towers. They argue that the presence of molten metal suggests the use of thermite, a type of explosive, to weaken the steel beams, which allegedly caused the buildings to collapse. They claim that fires from the plane crashes alone could not have reached the necessary temperatures to melt steel, while thermite burns at much higher temperatures and could have been used to ensure the destruction of the building's structural integrity. 4. Witnesses and unexplained explosions. Several individuals who were in the vicinity of the World Trade Center on September 11 reported hearing explosions before or as the buildings collapsed. Some people described hearing secondary explosions, which, according to controlled demolition theorists, could not be explained by the impacts of the planes alone. The presence of these unexplained explosions is often cited by conspiracy theorists as further evidence that the collapse was caused by a coordinated demolition. 5. Building 7, WTC-7. Another critical component of the controlled demolition theory revolves around World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story building that collapsed later in the afternoon on September 11. WTC-7 was not hit by a plane, but it suffered significant damage from debris from the collapse of the North Tower and fires that burned for hours. Despite the damage, the collapse of WTC-7 has been a focal point for those advocating for the controlled demolition theory. They argue that the building fell in a manner typical of a controlled demolition, as it collapsed symmetrically and at nearly free-fall speed, raising suspicions about the official explanation of fires causing its collapse. Despite these claims, the official investigation into the collapse of the World Trade Center conducted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, concluded that the tower's collapse was the result of structural failure caused by the combination of the impact of the hijacked planes and the subsequent fires. According to NIST's findings, the fires caused by the burning jet fuel and other materials ignited in the building weakened the steel structure to the point of failure, causing the buildings to collapse. They also addressed the issue of molten metal, explaining that the appearance of molten material was likely the result of aluminum from the plane interacting with other materials, not thermite. In addition to the NIST findings, the FEMA report, released in 2002, also supported the conclusion that the collapse of the towers was due to fire-induced structural damage. In terms of Building 7, NIST concluded that its collapse was caused by fires that were ignited by debris from the collapse of the North Tower, which weakened a critical structural column and led to the building's eventual collapse. The theory of controlled demolition has been widely debunked by engineers, architects, and experts in structural dynamics. Critics argue that the collapse of the towers followed a sequence consistent with the structural failures caused by fire and impact, and that the symmetry of the collapse was a natural result of the way the buildings were designed. Additionally, there is a significant body of evidence indicating that no explosives were used. Most demolitions involve a precise placement of charges and a specific timing to ensure a collapse that will occur in a controlled manner. However, no such evidence of explosive devices has ever been found at ground zero. Furthermore, the complexity of conducting a large-scale demolition on such a high-profile target without detection seems highly implausible. While the controlled demolition theory remains popular among certain conspiracy theorists, it has been thoroughly examined and rejected by experts in the fields of structural engineering, materials science, and explosive demolition. The official explanation for the collapse of the World Trade Center towers and Building 7 remains based on the findings of the NIST investigation, which concluded that the towers collapsed due to the combined effects of the plane impacts and the fires that followed, not as the result of a pre-planned demolition. Despite this, the controlled demolition theory continues to be a subject of debate and a point of interest for some individuals who are skeptical of the official narrative surrounding the events of 9/11. The attack on the Pentagon on September 11, 2001, which occurred as part of a coordinated effort by the terrorist group al-Qaeda, has also been subject to various conspiracy theories. Some theories dispute the official explanation, suggesting that the attack did not involve a hijacked plane or questioning other details of the incident. These theories have been widely debunked by experts, eyewitnesses, and physical evidence, but they continue to circulate in some circles. One of the most prevalent conspiracy theories surrounding the Pentagon attack is the claim that a missile, not American Airlines Flight 77, struck the building. Proponents of this theory argue that the damage to the Pentagon did not appear to be consistent with the crash of a large commercial airliner. They point to several factors, such as the relatively small hole at the point of impact and the minimal debris scattered around the site, as evidence that a missile, rather than a plane, was responsible for the attack. Some theorists also highlight the lack of widespread airplane wreckage at the crash site, arguing that the debris from the aircraft appeared insufficient for an event involving a Boeing 757. They claim that the crash should have left more wreckage, including larger pieces of the plane's fuselage, wings, and engines, and that the absence of such debris suggests the involvement of something other than a plane. Others claim that eyewitness testimonies contradict the official account of Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon. Some individuals reported seeing a missile-like object strike the building, while others mentioned seeing a small aircraft. These discrepancies in eyewitness accounts are often used to suggest that there was something amiss about the Pentagon attack, and that the plane crash was either fabricated or covered up. Another element of the Pentagon attack that fuels conspiracy theories is the Pentagon security camera footage. Some theorists claim that the government has intentionally suppressed or edited the footage that shows the plane approaching and crashing into the building, raising questions about the authenticity of the video evidence. The belief that the government deliberately concealed key evidence has fed suspicions about the official account of the attack. Despite these alternate theories, the official explanation for the Pentagon attack is well supported by a substantial body of evidence, eyewitness accounts, and expert analysis. Multiple sources of evidence have thoroughly debunked the idea that a missile, rather than a commercial airliner, was responsible for the damage to the Pentagon. 1. Eyewitness testimonies. Dozens of eyewitnesses, including military personnel, law enforcement, and civilians, observed American Airlines Flight 77 as it approached and crashed into the Pentagon. Many described seeing the plane flying low, with its distinctive American Airlines livery, and the subsequent explosion when it struck the building. Some survivors even reported hearing the plane's engines before impact. Eyewitnesses also confirmed seeing the plane's fuselage and parts of its wings after the crash. 2. Flight data and black boxes. The wreckage found at the Pentagon site, including pieces of the aircraft, was consistent with the crash of Flight 77. The flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder from Flight 77, which were recovered from the crash site, provided crucial evidence supporting the official narrative. These black boxes confirmed the flight's trajectory and the fact that it had been hijacked before crashing into the Pentagon. 3. Physical evidence. The damage caused to the Pentagon was consistent with a high-speed impact by a large aircraft. The hole left in the building was about 16 feet wide, while the plane's wings and fuselage would have torn through several layers of the Pentagon's reinforced structure before the building collapsed. Despite the seeming minimal amount of debris visible immediately after the crash, there were significant amounts of wreckage, including parts of the plane's wings, fuselage, and landing gear, found inside and outside the building. Investigators also found passenger remains and personal belongings, including luggage, consistent with Flight 77. The claim that the crash left too little wreckage is often attributed to the high-speed impact, the fire, and the collapse of part of the building, which could have concealed much of the debris. 4. Security camera footage. Several security cameras surrounding the Pentagon did capture footage of the plane as it approached and crashed into the building. While the footage was not immediately released to the public due to ongoing investigations, several frames from the security footage were eventually made available. The released images clearly show the silhouette of a large commercial airliner, which aligns with the official account of Flight 77 striking the Pentagon. The idea that the government deliberately suppressed or edited this footage is not supported by any credible evidence. 5. The nature of the damage. The Pentagon's reinforced structure is built to withstand significant impacts, making it more resilient to damage than other buildings. The small initial hole at the point of impact can be explained by the building's strong design, as the plane tore through the outer rings and the reinforced steel structure. The plane's engines and fuselage would have been absorbed by the building's defense mechanisms before the building ultimately collapsed, leaving a hole that was more contained than would have been seen in other buildings without such a design. 6. No evidence of explosives. There is no credible evidence to suggest that explosives were used in the attack on the Pentagon. While some conspiracy theorists claim that the symmetrical nature of the damage points to a controlled demolition, experts in explosive engineering argue that there is no indication of an explosive device being used. The damage from the plane's impact and the subsequent fires were consistent with what would be expected from a crash of a large jetliner. 7. The flight path and radar data. Radar data tracked the flight of Flight 77 from the moment it was hijacked until it struck the Pentagon. The plane's path was confirmed through both military and civilian radar, and the data matches the trajectory reported by eyewitnesses. The hijacked flight's course was consistent with a direct path toward Washington, D.C., and the Pentagon. The Pentagon, who was led by the Republican Party, whose are subjects of the deep state and heavily influenced by the global billionaires, about the attack on September 11, 2001, has been the subject of numerous conspiracy theories, most notably the idea that a missile, rather than Flight 77, was responsible for the damage. However, the claims of these alternate theories have been thoroughly debunked by extensive eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, and official investigations. The overwhelming consensus among experts is that American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked and deliberately flown into the Pentagon, causing the devastating damage that followed. The persistence of conspiracy theories surrounding the attack reflects broader questions about the events of 9/11 and the nature of trust in government narratives, but the available evidence firmly supports the conclusion that a commercial airliner, not a missile, struck the Pentagon that fateful day. The crash of United Airlines Flight 93, which occurred in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, on September 11, 2001, has also been the subject of various conspiracy theories. These theories suggest that the official account of the crash, where passengers fought back against the hijackers, leading to the plane crashing into a field, might not be accurate. Critics of the official narrative claim that there is more to the story, and that Flight 93 was shot down by the military or otherwise handled in a different manner. While these theories have persisted in some circles, they have been thoroughly debunked by multiple lines of evidence and expert analysis. The plane was shot down. One of the most common conspiracy theories regarding the crash of Flight 93 is the claim that the plane was shot down by the U.S. military before it could reach its intended target, which many believe to be either the White House or the U.S. Capitol. Proponents of this theory argue that the crash site was too small and the wreckage too scattered to be consistent with the crash of a commercial airliner. They contend that the U.S. military, fearing that the plane would be used as a weapon to attack a government building, made the decision to shoot it down. This theory is often fueled by the lack of visible wreckage and the way the plane crashed into a remote, rural field. The flight data and inconsistencies. Some conspiracy theorists point to what they consider inconsistencies in the flight data and black box recordings from Flight 93 as evidence that the plane did not crash as a result of the hijackers' actions. They argue that the timeline of events, including the timing of the last communications from the flight and the crash itself, is inconsistent with the official explanation. Critics contend that the military response to the hijacking and the final moments of the flight are unclear, suggesting that the government may be hiding the truth about what happened. The small size of the crash site. The relatively small and compact crash site in Shanksville has been cited by some conspiracy theorists as evidence that the plane did not crash in the typical manner. The theory suggests that the site's small size, combined with the scattered wreckage, is more consistent with an aircraft being shot down by a missile or fighter jet. Some also point to the absence of larger, recognizable pieces of the aircraft as suggesting that the crash was staged or that something more unusual occurred at the crash site. Absence of eyewitnesses. Another part of the theory rests on the fact that there were few eyewitnesses who directly saw the plane go down. The crash took place in a rural area, far from urban centers or populated areas, and as a result, there were fewer people who could directly observe the flight's final moments. This absence of eyewitness accounts has fueled suspicion and led some to claim that the true cause of the crash is being concealed. The role of the passengers. The official story surrounding Flight 93 is that a group of brave passengers attempted to overpower the hijackers after learning of the other attacks on September 11, ultimately causing the plane to crash in a field. Some conspiracy theorists argue that this version of events is too neat and doesn't fully account for the complexities of the situation. They claim that the actions of the passengers and crew might have been exaggerated or fabricated to fit a heroic narrative, obscuring the true events surrounding the crash. While the alternate theories surrounding Flight 93 continue to circulate, the official account of what happened on that fateful flight has been widely supported by eyewitness testimony, flight data, and forensic evidence. The conclusions reached by the 9/11 Commission report and other investigations into the crash thoroughly debunk the idea that the plane was shot down or that there is any substantial mystery about the crash site. The heroic actions of the passengers. The official story of Flight 93 is based on extensive testimony from the passengers' phone calls made during the flight, particularly those with their loved ones. Several passengers were able to call their families and inform them about the hijackings of the other planes, and many of them expressed their intention to fight back against the hijackers. These cell phone calls and air phone calls provided real-time information that helped piece together the timeline of events on the flight. The bravery of the passengers in fighting back is well documented, and it is believed that their actions forced the hijackers to crash the plane before it could reach its intended target. The idea that the passengers' heroism was fabricated is not supported by any credible evidence. The crash site and physical evidence. The crash site of Flight 93 is consistent with a high-speed impact by a large aircraft. The plane crashed into a remote, rural field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the debris was scattered over a wide area. However, this is not unusual for a high-speed crash. In fact, it's typical for the wreckage of a commercial airliner to be dispersed, especially in cases of high-energy impacts. The relatively small size of the crash site can also be explained by the fact that the plane plummeted into the ground at a steep angle after the passengers' efforts to overpower the hijackers, causing the wreckage to be concentrated in a small area. The black box recorders were recovered from the site and confirmed the events leading up to the crash, including the passengers' attempts to regain control of the aircraft. Eyewitness testimonies. While there were few eyewitnesses who saw the crash itself due to the remote location of the site, there were multiple individuals who reported seeing the plane's flight path in the moments leading up to the crash. These include reports from nearby residents who heard the plane's engines and saw it flying at a low altitude. Some witnesses reported seeing a plane dive into the field, which is consistent with the flight data and the crash site. Flight data and black box recordings. The flight data from Flight 93, along with the cockpit voice recorder, have been invaluable in piecing together the final moments of the flight. These recordings show that the plane was deliberately diverted from its original course and was being actively flown by the hijackers. The cockpit voice recorder also reveals the sounds of the passengers' struggle in the cockpit as they attempted to regain control. The data from these devices support the official story that the plane crashed as a result of the passengers' actions and not because of external intervention, such as a military strike. The timeline and military response. The theory that Flight 93 was shot down by the military is contradicted by the timeline of the events that day. The U.S. military response to the hijacking of the planes was coordinated with the knowledge that multiple planes had already been hijacked and were being used as weapons. The military response was delayed, partly because no one knew when or where the next hijacked plane would strike. By the time the military had the capability to intercept Flight 93, the plane had already crashed. The military's failure to shoot the plane down was not due to a cover-up but rather the result of the chaotic nature of the events of 9/11. The conspiracy theories surrounding the crash of Flight 93 have been thoroughly debunked by eyewitness testimony, flight data, and physical evidence. The official account of the plane being hijacked and the passengers' heroic actions, which led to the plane crashing into a field before it could reach its intended target, remains the most plausible explanation of what happened. There is no credible evidence to support the claim that the plane was shot down by the military, and the wreckage, along with the recovered flight data recorders, confirms the official narrative. While conspiracy theories about Flight 93 persist, the overwhelming evidence supports the conclusion that the plane's crash was the result of the hijackers' actions and the courageous efforts of the passengers to thwart them. In the aftermath of the September 11, 2001, attacks, a variety of conspiracy theories emerged, some of which accused the U.S. government of either having prior knowledge of the attacks or of deliberately allowing them to happen in order to justify military action and expand its global influence. These theories argue that various intelligence agencies, such as the CIA, FBI, and even the National Security Agency, NSA, were aware of the imminent threat posed by the al-Qaeda network but failed to act on that information, either intentionally or through incompetence. These accusations often focus on the notion that the government had motivations for allowing the attacks to unfold, ranging from gaining the public support for wars in Afghanistan and Iraq to consolidating power domestically through increased surveillance and military control. While these theories have been widely debated, they remain largely speculative, and many have been debunked through extensive investigations and analysis of the events leading up to and following 9/11. One of the most widely discussed conspiracy theories about the U.S. government's role in the 9/11 attacks is the claim that intelligence agencies had prior knowledge of the impending attacks but chose to either ignore or allow them to happen. This theory suggests that the Bush administration and other senior officials in the government were aware of al-Qaeda's plans to strike the United States but did not take the necessary steps to prevent the attack. Proponents of this theory argue that the attacks were preventable if intelligence had been acted upon effectively. A key point raised by theorists is that intelligence agencies had received specific warnings of an al-Qaeda plot to hijack planes and carry out terrorist attacks. These warnings included reports from foreign intelligence agencies, such as the Israeli Mossad, and information from FBI agents who had been tracking suspected terrorists within the United States. Some believe that these agencies either failed to share crucial information with one another or chose to downplay the threat, allowing the hijackers to proceed with their plans without interference. Additionally, some theorists argue that the government's focus on other priorities, like preventing a potential attack on U.S. embassies or dealing with domestic political issues, led to a failure to recognize the imminent threat posed by al-Qaeda. Another part of this theory focuses on the August 6, 2001 Presidential Daily Briefing, PDB, titled, "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S., which warned President George W. Bush that al-Qaeda was planning an attack in the U.S. However, this warning, while it did highlight the specific threat posed by bin Laden, did not detail the method of attack or the exact timing. Critics of the Bush administration argue that, despite receiving such a warning, the president and other officials did not take adequate measures to prepare for the attacks or disrupt al-Qaeda's operations before September 11. Supporters of the official account, however, maintain that the warning was general and did not include actionable intelligence that would have allowed authorities to prevent the attacks. Another related theory claims that the U.S. government, particularly the Bush administration, had a deliberate policy of inaction when it came to preventing the 9/11 attacks. This theory suggests that the government allowed the attacks to happen because it would serve as a justification for military intervention, particularly in the Middle East, and would also help to rally public support for the global war on terror. Proponents of this theory argue that the government stood to gain politically and economically from a terrorist attack on American soil, using it as an excuse to wage wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and to increase domestic security measures, including the implementation of the Patriot Act. Critics of the U.S. government's response to 9/11 also point to the fact that, prior to the attacks, the administration had been hesitant to confront al-Qaeda directly. The Clinton administration had taken some steps to combat terrorism, including missile strikes and covert operations aimed at disrupting al-Qaeda's activities, but the Bush administration had focused more on other issues, such as national missile defense and the geopolitical challenges in the Asia-Pacific region. This lack of focus on terrorism is often cited as evidence that the U.S. government did not prioritize or take seriously the threat posed by al-Qaeda, which, in turn, allowed the terrorist group to carry out its plan without significant interference. Another aspect of the inaction theory revolves around the failure to intercept the hijacked planes before they reached their targets. The NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, response to the hijackings has been the subject of intense scrutiny. On September 11, NORAD was responsible for tracking and intercepting aircraft that had been hijacked, but the response was slow and chaotic, with military jets not being scrambled until after the planes had already hit the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. Conspiracy theorists argue that this delay was not just a failure of communication or protocol but part of a deliberate effort to allow the attacks to occur. While these conspiracy theories about the government's foreknowledge and inaction in the lead-up to the 9/11 attacks have been widely circulated, they have been thoroughly debunked by multiple investigations and reports, including the 9/11 Commission report, which sought to uncover the full details of the events of that day and the lead-up to it. 1. The 9/11 Commission report. The 9/11 Commission, established by Congress, conducted a comprehensive investigation into the attacks, focusing on the actions of the U.S. government before and after September 11. The Commission found that there was no credible evidence to suggest that the government deliberately allowed the attacks to occur or had prior knowledge of the specific hijackings. While the report acknowledged intelligence failures and lack of coordination between agencies, it also emphasized that these issues were more the result of bureaucratic inefficiencies rather than any intentional inaction. 2. The PDB and other intelligence warnings. The August 6, 2001 presidential daily briefing did indeed highlight the threat from Osama bin Laden, but it did not provide detailed information on the hijackings or the specific timing of the attack. The warning was a general alert to the U.S. intelligence community about the growing threat of al-Qaeda, but did not identify any imminent or actionable plots that could have been disrupted. The theory that the government ignored or downplayed intelligence is countered by the fact that the FBI, CIA, and other agencies were actively monitoring al-Qaeda activities, but the hijackers' specific plans were difficult to predict. 3. The NORAD response. The delay in scrambling military jets to intercept the hijacked planes was largely due to the unprecedented nature of the attacks and the lack of a clear protocol for dealing with such a situation. The hijackers were able to take control of the planes relatively quickly, and the lack of communication between the FAA, NORAD, and other agencies contributed to the slow response. However, there is no evidence to suggest that the government deliberately prevented the military from intervening. 4. Government's response to terrorism. While it is true that the Bush administration was slow to fully address the growing threat of terrorism in the years leading up to 9/11, the notion that the government allowed the attacks to happen to justify military action is highly speculative. The attacks were devastating to the United States, and the loss of life was horrific. It seems unlikely that any administration would deliberately allow such an event to unfold, especially given the long-term consequences that followed, including the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. 5. Public and political reactions. In the aftermath of 9/11, there was widespread public outrage and a desire for justice. The government's response to the attacks, including the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security in the passage of the Patriot Act, was met with both support and criticism. While some viewed these actions as necessary for national security, others criticized them for infringing on civil liberties. However, the idea that these measures were implemented as part of a preordained plan to expand government power is not supported by the available evidence. While the accusations of foreknowledge and inaction regarding the September 11 attacks have been widely circulated, the available evidence does not support the notion that the U.S. government deliberately allowed the attacks to happen. The 9/11 Commission report and other investigations have found that, while there were intelligence failures and lapses in coordination, the attacks were the result of a well-planned and executed terrorist operation by al-Qaeda, not a government conspiracy. The events of 9/11 highlighted significant weaknesses in the U.S. intelligence community, but there is no credible evidence to suggest that the government had advanced knowledge of the hijackings or allowed them to unfold for political gain. The inside job conspiracy theory is one of the most enduring and widely discussed claims surrounding the events of September 11, 2001. According to this theory, the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were not carried out by al-Qaeda terrorists but were instead orchestrated by elements within the U.S. government or other shadow organizations. The theory suggests that these insiders either planned or allowed the attacks to occur as part of a broader scheme to justify military intervention, increase governmental control, or further certain political agendas. Proponents of the inside job theory argue that the official narrative surrounding the 9/11 attacks is a cover-up designed to obscure the real perpetrators and motives behind the attacks. The thinking behind the inside job theory hinges on a few key points that conspiracy theorists claim support their arguments. One of the central assertions of this theory is that the U.S. government or intelligence agencies had prior knowledge of the attacks but allowed them to happen, or possibly even facilitated them, in order to achieve certain political or military objectives. According to theorists, there were indications that the U.S. government had been aware of al-Qaeda's activities and plans but chose not to act on the information, or worse, intentionally allowed the attacks to take place. Proponents of the inside job theory argue that the 9/11 attacks provided the perfect pretext for the U.S. to launch the war on terror, invade Afghanistan, and later Iraq, which had geopolitical and economic interests. Some also suggest that the attacks allowed for the expansion of governmental surveillance powers, including the introduction of policies like the Patriot Act and the Homeland Security Act, which critics argue infringed upon civil liberties. These theorists claim that the real reason behind the attacks was not terrorism but rather a calculated move by the government to justify military intervention, assert control, and further a hidden agenda. Another key component of the inside job theory revolves around the collapse of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7, WTC-7. Conspiracy theorists argue that the symmetrical collapse of the towers, particularly the speed at which they fell, could not have been caused by the impact of the airplanes and the subsequent fires alone. They believe that the buildings were brought down by controlled demolition, implying that the U.S. government or other powerful factions may have orchestrated the attacks in such a way as to ensure the building's destruction. The collapse of WTC-7, which was not hit by a plane but collapsed hours after the Twin Towers fell, is also central to the inside job argument, with some suggesting that it was deliberately demolished to eliminate evidence related to the government's involvement. Another reason why the inside job theory persists is the perception that key government agencies, including the CIA, FBI, and NSA, either ignored or deliberately suppressed intelligence that could have prevented the attacks. Some proponents of the theory argue that these agencies were either involved in or complicit in the planning and execution of the attacks, believing that the agency's failure to prevent the attacks points to a deliberate action rather than incompetence or negligence. The theory further suggests that individuals within the government had financial or political motives to see the attacks take place, and they used their positions to manipulate events for personal or strategic gain. Finally, the media's role in shaping public perception of the 9/11 attacks is often cited by those who subscribe to the inside job theory. They argue that mainstream media outlets either intentionally ignored evidence that contradicted the official narrative or were complicit in pushing the government's version of events. This, they claim, was part of a larger cover-up designed to maintain public support for military interventions and the increased security measures that followed the attacks. While the inside job theory has gained significant traction among certain groups, it is widely debunked by experts and investigations into the events of September 11, 2001. The overwhelming evidence from independent investigations, expert analyses, and the findings of the 9/11 Commission report thoroughly contradict the idea that the attacks were an inside job orchestrated by the U.S. government or any other faction within the country. 1. The 9/11 Commission report and independent investigations. The 9/11 Commission, which was established to investigate the events of September 11, 2001, spent over 2 years gathering testimony, documents, and evidence from various government agencies, intelligence organizations, and other entities. The final report, released in 2004, provides a detailed account of the attacks, the U.S. government's response, and the failures of intelligence agencies to prevent the attacks. The report concluded that the attacks were planned and executed by al-Qaeda, and there was no evidence to suggest that any government officials were involved in the planning or facilitation of the attacks. The Commission's findings were the result of thorough and transparent investigations, and their conclusion is widely accepted by experts in the field. 2. The collapse of the Twin Towers. The argument that the collapse of the Twin Towers could only have been caused by a controlled demolition is not supported by structural engineering experts. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, conducted a comprehensive investigation into the collapse of the Twin Towers and concluded that the impact of the hijacked planes and the subsequent fires caused the building's structural failure. The intense heat generated by the fires, fueled by jet fuel, melted the steel framework and weakened the building's integrity, leading to the progressive collapse of the towers. The symmetrical collapse of the buildings is explained by the way the structure was designed, with the floors and columns collapsing in a uniform manner due to the failure of key structural components. The idea that explosives were used is dismissed because there is no physical evidence of explosive residue or sounds of detonation during the collapse. 3. WTC-7 collapse. The collapse of WTC-7, which was not hit by a plane but sustained significant damage from debris from the nearby Twin Towers, has been a focal point for conspiracy theorists. However, the NIST investigation into WTC-7's collapse concluded that it was caused by fires ignited by debris from the collapsing Twin Towers. The fires burned for several hours, causing the building's structural supports to weaken, leading to the progressive collapse of the structure. The claim that WTC-7 was brought down by controlled demolition is debunked by the NIST report, which provides a detailed explanation of the building's collapse and shows that no explosives were used. 4. Intelligence failures. The idea that the CIA, FBI, or other intelligence agencies deliberately allowed the attacks to happen in order to further a political or military agenda is not supported by any credible evidence. While there were significant intelligence failures leading up to 9/11, these were due to poor communication and a lack of coordination between agencies, not a deliberate conspiracy. Investigations, including those by the 9/11 Commission, found that intelligence agencies failed to fully recognize the threat from al-Qaeda and did not act on the information available in a timely manner. However, this failure is not evidence of complicity but rather the result of systemic issues within the intelligence community, which have since been addressed with improved communication and coordination. 5. The role of the media. While some conspiracy theorists argue that the mainstream media was complicit in a cover-up, the role of the media in the aftermath of 9/11 has been one of extensive reporting on the attacks and the investigations that followed. The media played a key role in covering the aftermath of the attacks, including the 9/11 Commission's hearings and the ongoing investigations into the hijackers and al-Qaeda. Conspiracy theories about the media's role are based on the belief that the media ignored alternative narratives, but in reality, there has been ample coverage of dissenting viewpoints, and many documentaries and investigative reports have questioned aspects of the official story, including the role of intelligence agencies. 6. Al-Qaeda's involvement. The claim that the attacks were an inside job is also contradicted by the fact that al-Qaeda publicly claimed responsibility for the attacks. Osama bin Laden and other al-Qaeda leaders acknowledged their involvement in the planning and execution of the attacks, and numerous independent investigations have confirmed the group's central role. The attacks on September 11 fit the broader objectives of al-Qaeda, which had long sought to target American symbols of power and influence. The overwhelming evidence linking the attacks to al-Qaeda undermines any argument that the U.S. government was behind the attacks. The inside job theory surrounding the 9/11 attacks has been extensively debunked by experts, investigations, and the findings of the 9/11 Commission report. While conspiracy theories often focus on the collapse of the Twin Towers, the destruction of WTC-7, and alleged intelligence failures, there is no credible evidence to suggest that the U.S. government orchestrated the attacks. The overwhelming evidence points to al-Qaeda as the perpetrators of the attacks, and the failures of intelligence agencies can be attributed to systemic issues rather than deliberate complicity. While questioning the official narrative is a part of healthy skepticism, the inside job theory does not stand up to the weight of evidence and expert analysis. The attacks on September 11, 2001, were a tragedy carried out by terrorists, and the ongoing investigations into the events of that day have provided a clear and comprehensive understanding of what happened. Don't forget to subscribe because we have a new video every week. Also, please give us a like and leave a comment. And now, let's roll back to the video. The events of September 11, 2001, remain a defining moment in modern history. The coordinated terrorist attacks carried out by al-Qaeda led to significant loss of life, widespread destruction, and profound changes in global geopolitics. The attacks not only brought the United States to the forefront of global counterterrorism efforts but also changed the way governments and citizens approached issues of security, freedom, and privacy. While the official narrative, as detailed in the 9/11 Commission report, points to al-Qaeda as the responsible party, numerous conspiracy theories have emerged in the years since, questioning the nature of the attacks and the events surrounding them. These theories, from claims of controlled demolitions to the idea that the U.S. government facilitated or allowed the attacks for political gain, have been widely debunked by experts, investigations, and independent analyses. Nonetheless, these alternative views persist, driven by skepticism toward the government's actions, the desire for alternative explanations, and the emotional aftermath of such a catastrophic event. In the wake of the attacks, the world witnessed unprecedented global reactions, ranging from NATO's invocation of Article 5 for the first time in its history to the U.S. launching the War on Terror, including military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. The cultural impact of 9/11 has been profound, with memorials, movies, books, and art commemorating the lives lost and the challenges faced by both survivors and first responders. The 9/11 Memorial in New York City stands as a testament to resilience, while the broader cultural and political shifts continue to shape the world today. Despite the debunking of various conspiracy theories, the aftermath of 9/11 still raises important questions about governmental transparency, the limits of surveillance, and the balance between security and civil liberties. The tragic events of that day left a lasting scar on the collective consciousness, but they also spurred critical discussions about the world we live in today. Ultimately, 9/11 serves as a reminder of the fragility of peace and the profound impact of violence on both a national and global scale. As we continue to navigate its consequences, the need for understanding, vigilance, and accountability remains paramount. The search for truth, whether through official channels or independent investigations, is vital to ensuring that such an event is never repeated, and that the lessons of 9/11 are honored in the pursuit of a more just and secure world.